Okay, so get this, Janet Jackson, like the Janet Jackson, from Rhythm Nation. Well, she said something in an interview recently that has really gotten people talking.
Yeah, it's a really good example of how even like a small comment, can turn into a whole big thing, especially these days with, social media and everything.
Yeah, and this is definitely not small, especially with, the election and everything. So basically, to catch everyone up, Janet Jackson in this interview with Guardian, she repeated this conspiracy theory about Kamala Harris, the one that says she isn't black.
Right, and it's just straight up false. Kamala Harris's family, her background, it's all public knowledge. Her dad was born in Jamaica, her mom in India. Like that's pretty clearly biracial.
Exactly,
Yeah.
which is why Jackson, saying this is such a big deal,
Yeah.
let's actually hear it straight from the source.
Yeah.
This is what Jackson said in the interview. She said, well, you know what they supposedly said? She's not black. That's what I heard, that she's Indian.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and it doesn't stop there. So when the interviewer was like, well, actually, she's biracial, to correct her, Jackson kept going.
Oh no. Did she double down?
Yeah, she did. She said her father's white. That's what I was told. I mean, I haven't watched the news in a few days. I was told that they discovered her father was white.
Wow. So she didn't just sort of repeat it like she'd heard it before, but then she added even more misinformation to it.
Yeah, it's really unbelievable. It's like a perfect example of how these things can get out of control.
Hmm.
But what makes this even more interesting, I think, and also potentially worse, is that it's Janet Jackson saying it.
Oh, absolutely. This isn't just some random person online. This is a huge celebrity, someone that a lot of people really look up to. Whether she means it or not, what she says carries a lot of weight.
Yeah, and I think that's what's really got people talking about this. I mean, it's one thing to see this kind of stuff online in like, the comments section or whatever, but for someone as respected as Janet Jackson to just casually repeat, it makes you wonder who else is thinking this way.
It's kind of a scary thought when you think about it. And it really gets at this huge issue that we're dealing with, which is, when you have a lot of influence, what responsibility comes along with that? Especially these days with how we get our information.
It's easy to just think, oh, she just heard something
Yeah.
and repeated it, like she didn't really mean anything by it. But this whole thing about Kamala Harris, it's actually a lot worse than you might think when you look at where it came from.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head. This isn't like some random internet thing. This actually goes back to Trump during the last election. He was the one who really pushed this whole narrative.
Now that you mention it, I do remember hearing something about that. But how did he even make this a thing?
Well, Trump basically said a bunch of times publicly that Harris shouldn't even be able to be president because she's biracial. And he didn't even try to hide it. He was using his platform to make these claims seem true, even though they totally weren't.
It's really scary when you think about how someone like him can just use misinformation like that to get what they want. And like you were saying before, it's not even a new thing to attack a politician's race like this, especially when it's a black politician who's doing something really groundbreaking like Kamala Harris.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's something that just keeps happening throughout history. People try to discredit black politicians by making people question if they're really black. It's all about using people's prejudices to make them doubt these politicians and ultimately try to reduce their power.
It's crazy to think that someone like Janet Jackson could accidentally help spread this harmful idea. And it makes you wonder in this day and age with how much information's out there, how can we even tell what's true anymore?
It's definitely a big question. And it actually relates to another part of Jackson's interview. Do you remember how she said she hadn't watched the news in a few days before saying all this?
Like it was just some random thought she had. But that's kind of how a lot of people get their news now, right? Just little bits and pieces here and there.
And that's the problem, right? We have access to so much information, but that also means it's so easy to get the wrong information. Sometimes it's an honest mistake. Maybe you're only seeing certain news sources or the algorithms are showing you what they want you to see. And then other times it's completely intentional people trying to manipulate you with fake news.
It's like we're trying to walk through a minefield of information, constantly trying to figure out what's real and what's not. It's exhausting.
I get it, but we can't just give up. We have to get better at figuring out what information we can trust. We have to learn how to think critically about what we see and hear.
So basically, we need to become like media detectives.
Exactly. We need to be smarter about what we consume and how we consume it.
So we started with this whole thing about Janet Jackson and her comments, but it's really got us thinking about how easy it is for misinformation to spread and how hard it can be to actually be informed these days.
It really makes you think about how something that seems kind of small at first can actually be a symptom of a much bigger problem. Like we're seeing the tip of the iceberg when it comes to things like influence and responsibility and how we even define truth in this day and age.
Right. It's totally overwhelming. It's like information's being thrown at us from every direction. So how are we even supposed to know what to believe? It's enough to make you just want to give up.
I hear you. It can feel like an impossible task. But listen, we're not powerless here. We have to empower ourselves to be more discerning. We have to learn how to think critically about all this information that's coming at us.
So what does that look like practically? How can we actually be smarter about the information we take in? Especially when it comes to things like fake news and conspiracy theories.
Okay, well, first of all, you can't just rely on one source for your information. Like if you're only getting your news from social media or just one news channel, you're missing a lot of important context and you're probably only getting one side of the story.
So basically, we need to broaden our horizons. When it comes to news sources, that is,
Exactly. And be careful about anything that seems a little too good to be true. You know how we tend to gravitate towards things that confirm what we already believe? Well, sometimes that can lead us down the wrong path. Don't be afraid to question your own assumptions. Look into where information is coming from and be open to the idea that you might not have all the facts.
that takes effort, though. It's way too easy to just read a headline or see something on social media and just accept it without thinking about who's saying it or what their agenda might be.
I agree, it takes a conscious effort to stop and think. But that's why it's so important to get into the habit of thinking critically about what we see and hear. It's like working a muscle. The more you use it, the stronger it gets.
So it's about being more aware, more intentional, and more willing to question everything even if we think we already know the answer.
You got it. And it all comes back to what we were talking about with Janet Jackson. It just goes to show that misinformation can come from anywhere, even people we admire and trust.
Makes you think.
It should. This is a wake-up call. We need to be more careful. We need to be more discerning. We need to be more critical of the information that's all around us.
And on that note, we're going to leave you with a little homework. What are your most trusted sources of information? And how can you make sure that you're not just passively taking in information, but actually thinking about it in a critical way? Until next time, stay curious, stay informed, and most importantly, stay critical.